Hey sociology classes, Mrs. T here with your first of week 14's lectures. We're in the middle of unit 4 and this will be the last lecture we have about chapter 11, which is about marriage and family, the sociological definitions of marriage and family. And today what we're going to do is look at the norms having to do with marriage and family and how they're integrated and connected with the additional norms having to do with the economy, like we talked about last week, specifically social stratification. So you see that I have drawn our 7-rung socioeconomic ladder on the board over here, and I've got a couple of the classes, the socioeconomic classes labeled. Remember, we've got underclass, working poor, working class. Big chunk of the population in the United States is working class. Middle class, and then lower upper and upper class, just for a really quick review of that from Unit 3. Since I did a quick review of that from Unit 3, and since I'm talking about social stratification, there's a great big hint about the kinds of review you need to go back to previous units and do so that you can ace test 4 that is coming up in 2 weeks. So let's get busy with this last short lecture about family and marriage, and this is again going to be about the sociological definitions of family and marriage and the way that they're integrated into social stratification or inequality in society. So please remember, when you are reading this chapter, I have recently read all of your reaction papers about the first introduction to this. And remember that love is not part of the definition of family, and nor is it part of the definition of marriage from a sociological standpoint. That's going to be a key issue that we're going to talk about here regarding social stratification, particularly in the United States, but worldwide, when we look at marriage as an economic arrangement among the people who are involved in the marriage. Okay, so social stratification, of course, is the unequal distribution of wealth in a society. Wealth, power, and prestige, to use Max Weber's classifications of it. So we have unequal amounts of education, occupation, and income in the United States that wrap up together. Those 3 achieved statuses are wound up together in what we call socioeconomic class. Okay? So working class people are working class people because they have a certain education level, and that education level allows them to be qualified and skilled at certain occupations, and those certain occupations have a certain income level that allows them to have a certain style of life, allows them to have certain aspects of comfort and advancement, certain parts of life chances that are different from somebody in the upper middle class, for instance. Upper middle class people have a certain level of education, and that certain level of education allows them to have certain occupations that they are qualified to engage in, and those occupations have a different income level. And that's why we have these differences in any of these rungs on this ladder, because of the combination of those achieved statuses. So I want to look in particular today about how marriage and the way marriage occurs in the United States, the way we make selections about who we are or are not going to marry, how that can contribute to perpetuating means keep it going. How can our marriage selection process in the United States, how can it potentially keep all this inequality going from generation to generation? Here's one of those questions, or that is one of those questions that your sociological imagination is going to help you answer. Because remember, from the very first time we met each other back in January, we've been talking about the sociological imagination. The ability to make informed conclusions about macro-level social norms and how those macro-level social issues can affect our micro-level choices, life experiences, successes, failures, all those kinds of things. So this is one of those questions: how can or does our marriage selection norms in the United States, how does that keep working class people working class? How does that keep upper middle class people upper middle class? How does that work against upward social mobility? How does that work against maybe the American dream that we've talked about so often? Okay, so in the United States, of course, many of you wanted to talk about this word in your reaction papers recently. Many of you said marriage happens when you love each other. We need to clear that up. In the United States, we have a norm where we think love is essential for a good marriage. That's a macro level norm that kindergarten teachers during story time read golden books to their class about how people fall in love and get married and have children and live the American dream happily ever after. Okay? This is a norm in American society, a norm where we assume the people who engage in a marriage contract, the legal marriage agreement, that those people should, for some reason, love each other. So in the marriage selection process in the United States, we have dating. And dating is kind of like testing the waters, where we're going to see whether we're compatible enough, see whether we like each other enough. That's where that cohabitation norm or trend also comes in. People think, okay, well, we're going to play house, so to speak. We're going to move in as though we are a permanent couple, though we're not going to have that legal bond of marriage. Remember, cohabitation is not about sharing expenses with some random roommate or your favorite cousin since you were 3. It doesn't have to be a random roommate to not be cohabitation. But cohabitation is somebody that you are in a romantic relationship with, and it's part of your social identity in your circle of friends, that they recognize you as a couple who's having marital type relations, but just without that legal protection that marriage brings. So this dating thing is kind of what we do to see whether we're going to be compatible with other people. And then supposedly we choose, based on love, who we are going to get hitched with, so to speak. So here is where the macro level social norm for selecting someone in marriage, having the marriage partners be integral or central to choosing their partner for themselves. Here's where the macro level norm potentially, you tell me what you think, potentially contributes to this inequality that none of us liked. When we were in Unit 3 and we were talking about this inequality, none of us liked this. We didn't like seeing Lolly down here on the bottom when we watched Lolly's Kin, The Legacy of Cotton. We didn't like thinking that people up here already had an advantage from the day they were born in order to achieve this status again for themselves as adults, or even move up further. We didn't like thinking that inheriting wealth gave you a cushion so that you could probably stay in your life chances that were up here rather than have to endure some of the lacking life chances that were down here. We didn't like any of that. But in the United States, we love this idea of love and being able to select our own marriage partners. And that is a practice that in your textbook, there's a vocabulary word, and the vocabulary word is homogamy. This means same. In this case, this is a marriage selection process in which the people who are going to be married typically choose a mate who has the same social characteristics as they do. And let's look at why. So this is a marriage selection pattern. Marriage selection pattern in which people like us in the United States who think we need this as a prerequisite to a successful marriage, we tend to shop, see my air quotes here, shop for a marriage partner within a group of people, a category of people who have the same social characteristics as ourselves. we tend to look for, not only look for, let me rephrase that. Let me not say look for. We tend to find without looking. People in our same social characteristic groups, social characteristic categories, we tend to find those same people because who are we hanging out with? Let's look at macro scale social norms for the economy, and let's talk about working class for just a second. Okay, working class has a certain education, occupation style, and income level. So let's just look at that one thing, income level. If you are in the working class, you have a particular income level that will allow you to only live in certain places within your state, within your city, within your county. You only have so much money for that particular property value in that area, or for that particular rent cost in that area. So other working class people, because they are also in a similar income category as you, are going to live in those same neighborhoods, those same apartment complexes. And so you, growing up, are going to play with kids who are working class kids from working class families. You, growing up, are going to have more in common with working class kids from working class families because that's what you see in your household. You are going to grow up with working class life chances and therefore have some kind of common understanding with your friends around you, with the people that you hang out with. You're going to have hobbies that working class people can afford to have. You're probably not going to have a sailboat and go sailing on the weekends, or have, a golf vacation every summer and go for 2 weeks to, I don't know, some golf resort in Florida, or go to Hilton Head for a regatta or something like that. And probably some of you have to look up these words. I know I had to look up the word regatta the very first time I heard it, because that ain't me. That's not who I hung out with growing up. It's great if you did hang out with those people growing up, but the point here is, if you come from a working class household, you have a certain income level that will allow you to live around other working class households. So there's your circle of friends, there's your circle of classmates, there's your circle of potential partners, romantic partners. That working class category not only has that economic income level in common, but they also have similar education levels. So probably mom and dad of this working class household and that working class household and this working class household, probably one of them has a high school diploma, maybe one of them has an associate's degree, maybe both of them have high school diplomas, maybe they have those similar educational backgrounds, and you know what they think about themselves? They think they're doing just fine, and they are. They're doing just fine. And so when they encourage their kids to do well in school, they encourage their kids to, maybe do a little bit better than they did in school. Maybe they tell their kids, you know what, I wouldn't struggle quite so much if I had just finished that college degree. You should finish that college degree. But when it comes down to it, because they didn't finish that college degree, they don't have any contacts at the college to help them out with the logistics of this. They don't have any contacts with a fraternity or a sorority, somebody who owns this law firm or that financial conglomerate to get you a job or an internship so that you have a shoe-in to some other job that they didn't have access to. This kid does. This kid up here, even if he doesn't go to college right out of high school, this kid's circle, adult circle around him has connections, lots of different connections, different places. And so that social network, in the old-fashioned sense of the word social network, enables the child of this household not only to have more enhanced life chances than this child, but the hobbies, the amount of disposable income, the education level of the parents, therefore the way that the parents encourage the child to aspire in his or her academic pursuits is going to be very, very different. The kinds of occupations that this household sort of insists on for their children or for the spouses of their children, these are the people who are going to have Sunday brunch at the country club, and their children will date each other. And these are the kinds of people whose kids work as a caddy at the golf course in the country club, or as the omelet cook on the Sunday brunch line, you might interact with these people, and some of you are thinking, oh yes, but that means they could pair off, and that means they could. Yes, you're right, but in sociology, we talk about trends across the board and not isolated examples like the movie Pretty Woman, where somebody goes from here to here overnight because of a positive marriage match that somebody made. They're called fairy tales for a reason. And in sociology, we talk about trends across the board and not the isolated, unusual circumstances that are the exceptions to those trends across the board. So what the trend across the board is going to be, even though these people and these people might mingle at school, they might mingle at Sunday brunch with different purposes for being there, they are probably not going to have the same hobbies in common, the same lifestyle in common, the same just outlook on life, the same educational direction, the same anything in common for them to have long-lasting relationships. I mentioned a Julia Roberts movie just a minute ago, Pretty Woman. Let's look at an even earlier one that has an example of this. In it, if you want to look up Mystic Pizza, if you haven't seen that already, you can look at that from a critical eye, using your sociological imagination, look for the social issues in that movie, and how the background, the socialization process of the different socioeconomic classes can sort of push you to repeat the same the same socioeconomic class that you came from. It's very, very unusual for someone to become Bill Gates, for instance. That's why you know his name when I say it, because he's an exception to the rule. There are exceptions to the rule, but do we want exceptions to the rule when we're learning about social structure and the macro scale norms that affect you and me on a micro scale? No, we don't want to talk about exceptions to the rules. In sociology, we want to talk about trends across the board, and we can talk about micro-level experiences. However, we want to look at the micro-level experiences that follow the overwhelming trend, the 99.9% of the circumstances that occur in a society. So, in the United States, we tend to pick people who, let me put an X through that, so sorry, but let me put an X through that. We tend to pick people who we hang out with, we say we love them. Those people tend to come from the same social background as we have, and therefore we repeat the same social background as our parents gave us. Back to Unit 2, when we were talking about social structure, back in Chapter 4, I think it was, when we talked about ascribed status for the very first time, and it said class, social class is an ascribed status. It's because in our socialization process, we learn this style of life, or we learn this style of life, and therefore the other people who share those same social characteristics are the people we feel most comfortable with, the people we feel ourselves with, the people we're going to find our besties in that group. We're going to find the rest of our families and relatives, our kin, most likely in that group, and we are most likely going to find our mate in marriage from the same social characteristics as we. Therefore, working class people tend to marry working class people and have working class babies who grow up to be working class adults, who grow up to be working class adults, who grow up to be working class adults. And the patterns for selecting our own spouses contribute significantly to the repeated social inequality that we see in all of these different rungs of the ladder in our macro scale social structure in the United States. We tend to hang out with people who have our same social characteristics. There's a section in the book, you'll see a picture of of what's it called? Oh, it's called farmersonly.com. Y'all know that ad, right? So these dating services that are based on this concept of homogamy. Hey, only sign up for this dating service if you have these characteristics in common, because I want to shop for you. You want to shop for me. I don't want to shop for, what is it? I don't want to shop for no city person, or whatever they say on that ad. It's because they're letting the dating service kind of do some of this homogamy marriage selection for them. It's because we're participating in, hey, I want to like you first and then potentially love you so we can get married, but we're going to get married and follow the same path that we came from, rather than potentially using marriage. Yes, I'm saying that, using marriage as an economic uplift mechanism, like many cultures in the world around us do. Some of you are shocked that I would suggest that marriage could ever be an economic uplift mechanism. However, in a lot of areas of the world, arranged marriage is the norm. Arranged marriage is the norm. In an arranged marriage, the kin of the people to be married decide who from their kinship group. So if we've got the bride over here and we've got the groom over here, the kin in the groom's family and the kin in the bride's family get together and they choose each other based on, what does this kinship group have to offer and what does this kinship group have to offer? Is it economic? Is it political? Is it some kind of social resource that is advantageous if we unite these two groups? And it is the kin of this group, of this person, and the kin of this person who decide the best match within all of their kinship group in order to form a socially accepted union called a marriage and have children. Okay, so remember, marriage is the assumption, or family is the assumption you're caring for young, right? And marriage is the assumption you have a sexual relationship. And so the assumption is you're going to have at least one child, most often more than that. And therefore, that child is going to belong not only to the kinship of the bride, but also the kinship of the groom. And therefore, it solidifies that marriage, the wealth of this kinship group, and the wealth of this kinship group is united, and it gives that child the advantage of that. Many times, arranged marriages, maybe there's a village over here, and there's a baker and his wife with a daughter, and the daughter learned the role that the mother filled in that bakery. And so she, from the early age, worked alongside her mother in the bakery doing woman things, see my air quotes, in the bakery. And there's another village over here that has a baker and his wife and his son. And the son grew up in the bakery learning man things to do in the bakery. And so there's my air quotes again. So the groom grew up knowing how to be the man's role in a successful bakery. The bride grew up knowing how to be the woman's role in a successful bakery. They're in two different villages, and there's a third village over here, and that village doesn't have a bakery yet. And so this kinship group and that kinship group says, you know what? Match made in economic heaven. Let's get these two together. Let's set them up in a little bakery. They will never ask us for money. They will always be set. And they already know how to completely wonderfully complement each other and have a successful economic relationship called a marriage and a family. And are some of you thinking this right now? Are some of you thinking about this? Stop it. That doesn't have to be first. And in most of the places in the world, it's not first. It comes later, if at all. And honestly, if it never comes, you're probably going to be nicer to that person over the long haul, just because there's a little bit of something that encourages us to be politer with each other when we don't have that love emotion that's so volatile between us. If we love each other, we're much more likely to be nasty to each other, nasty to the point where I just can't stand your face anymore in some cases. Whereas if we just have a polite agreement that, hey, This bakery is a match made in economic heaven, and this is the best thing for my economic security moving forward. If I learned those things in my socialization process, because the norms in my culture where I grew up were not about homogamy and choosing my own mate, but the norms that I learned from infancy to whenever it was my time to be this, those norms prepared me to accept the behavior that the kin of the bride is going to choose and the kin of the groom is going to choose, and therefore your mindset is going to be completely different. Some of you are thinking, oh, how horrible right now. The reason you're thinking that, the reason you're having those ethnocentric feelings, is because in our socialization process, we were told that we should choose. We were told that that's like maybe some kind of divine reason why we should choose. We were told this, and therefore we expect it. So this sounds really foreign to you right now, maybe even horrible. But these arranged marriages most often focus on the economic function of marriage and family, the economic needs of this person, the income, occupation, and education of this person who gets it within the bakery when they're growing up. And so marriage and family can, again, in this arrangement, it produces exactly the same social class as the person came from, with a stable economic base. In some cases, arrangements are made based on a much older person here who maybe needs help around the house. That's how much older we are, but is well established with money, is well established with other kinds of wealth like property or with a social position. And maybe this person is much, much younger because you're stronger, you have more stamina when you're young, and you can take care of someone with more energy. And therefore, this person maybe comes from a terribly impoverished household, but her kin might make arrangements, in this case, with this person himself in order to marry this person to this person, and automatically bring this person who maybe was born, I'm using the United States social ladder here, but maybe that person was born on this rung of this ladder with relative poverty, and all of a sudden we can make an arrangement so that this person marries this person, and that economic boost you used, in that case, marriage as a social uplift mechanism, an economic uplift mechanism, and many places in the world use marriage for that particular reason. Many places in the world use marriage for a variety of reasons, and love ain't one of them in most places. The idea of someone fulfilling another person, the idea of someone being ordained to be with just one and one other person, is an idea that we learn in the United States, but it's much more a storybook kind of idea than just nitty-gritty, how is the daily life going to work in your relationship moving forward. A household costs a lot of money, and when you have your economic situation answered, when you have answers to economic situations, then the rest of your life chances can happen much more easely. And usually love, especially if we jump into a marriage based on love, well, I've got it so scratched out you probably can't see this, but anyway, marriage is based on love, especially when we are young and unaware that marriage mostly is sacrifice and not fulfillment. When we base a relationship like that on love, that's one of the reasons why we see so much divorce in the United States. Just one of the reasons why we see so much divorce among young people who cohabitate first before marriage. Cohabitation seems to be much more successful for people in the United States if you're over 40 when it starts. For some reason, that maturity level enables you to be more successful because you've got a little bit more hindsight, you've got a little bit more knowledge about how that kind of relationship is much more about giving than it is taking, and it's much more about sacrifice than it is fulfillment. And so that's another thing that these kids over here in the arranged marriage, in their socialization process, fulfillment, completion of the other half of me, or whatever kind of beautiful poetry you can think of about your spouse and about how you want to live happily ever after, and it's beautiful poetry. But that kind of idea never enters into the socialization process of people in other places that look at marriage in particular as an economic arrangement between the people who are engaged in it. So, what do you think? Blow this out of the water, write me a reaction paper about this, look up how marriage can be perhaps a social uplift mechanism, and probably do some research about cultures around the world that have a different socialization process altogether. The norms and the ideas about marriage are different altogether, and therefore the people who are entering into the marriage have a very different outlook than you and I. We could not handle, probably. As a matter of fact, there's a TV show called Married at First Sight, where sociologists and psychologists try to match people without them ever meeting until marriage day. Those marriages don't work out, not because it's a bad idea to have arranged marriages, but because in our socialization process in this culture, that concept is so foreign. We're biased against it from the start, and we also think it's much more about me, fulfill me, rather than I've got to be completely selfless in order for this arrangement to work. So anyway, marriage and family, these are economic classifications. They can contribute to the continued social inequality that exists in any society, or they can be used to overcome social inequality in the case of the very impoverished being arranged in marriage to someone who is not so impoverished and has that benefit to offer the person and her family in many cases. So this is the last discussion from chapter 11, and the next time we see each other, we probably have 5 or 6 more short lectures for this whole semester. 2 or 3, probably 3 of the next lectures are going to be about religion as a social institution. We're not going to talk about which religion is right, which religion is correct. We're not going to talk about controversial stuff. We're going to look at religion objectively as a social institution. I'm going to ask you to get rid of your ethnocentrism and try to use that sociological imagination, understand how the macro trends in society affect micro-scale behaviors, and we're going to look at the connection between the economy and religious norms in various places around the world. Pretty interesting stuff. So I will see you then. Text me with any kind of questions that you have. Bye!